Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire supported by Glenlivet Books. We present today a special and informed view from the United States to try and make sense of the political turmoil the country seems to have collapsed into. My guest is the United States National Editor of the Financial Times, Edward Luce. Ed Luce, it's almost 6 days since the unbelievable storming of the Capitol. Do you have any sense of how the American people, and I mean not politicians and press, but ordinary folk, are responding to what's happened? Are they still stunned and shaken, or have they begun to put it behind themselves and move on?
I'm good to be with you, Karen. I think it depends which American people you're talking about. This is a deeply divided country. There's been some polls that show that the majority of Americans would like to see the legal system apply to people who've very flagrantly broken the law by storming the Capitol, some of them armed, waving the Confederate flag for the first time in history on the grounds of the Capitol building. So I think if you're looking at the sort of broad-based opinion, it's horrified. But there is a significant minority of America that shares the views, if not necessarily the methods, of those who stormed Capitol Hill, namely that this was a stolen election, that a socialist, liberal, deep state is running the country, and that radical action is needed to prevent this liberal coup, if you like. So there are different realities at work here, but I'd say the majority are appalled by what happened.
Now, I know that there is a lot of talk of taking action against President Trump, either by way of impeachment or by way of the 25th Amendment. Several big names in the Republican Party, like the governors of Vermont and Maryland, congressmen like Adam Kinzinger, have called for action. But do you believe that Nancy Pelosi is genuinely serious and will actually move impeachment proceedings later this week?
She'll probably get Trump impeached for a second time Wednesday or Thursday, but it won't go to the Senate, if indeed it ever goes to the Senate, until after Biden has been inaugurated. And there's no real precedent for convicting somebody who's been impeached after they've left office, which Trump, of course, will do next week. So I think that there is a debate going on about whether this is just a purely symbolic action that has no real impact, and whether, in fact, it's the next attorney general and the actual sort of arms of law enforcement that should be dealing with Trump, rather than an attempt to remove him from office a few days before he's due to go anyway.
But isn't there a danger if they actually go ahead with the impeachment? I know that the Democrats want to set a marker to ensure that no future president breaches the red lines Trump so repeatedly has. But if they do impeach him, will it not infuriate his supporters, exacerbate the divide that has already literally cleaved America in half? Isn't it a dangerous thing to do?
I think it's probably, if you ask my personal analysis of the situation, much less dangerous than not doing anything. If you leave a problem to fester, it will grow. And the next time there is an attempted coup, and make no mistake, this was an attempted coup, however sort of tragicomic its methods, this was an attempted coup. Next time might be a more successful attempted coup. So I think the view has hardened considerably since last Wednesday, that there is a party in America, or at least most of a party in America, that is no longer a believer in democracy, that it is essentially an authoritarian party, and that when it oversteps the law must come down hard. Liberal democracy doesn't exist all by itself. It exists because it's hard fought. It's hard won, and it needs to be hard maintained. The old saying from Benjamin Franklin, one of the founding fathers, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. So I think the mood has shifted quite markedly. The more we learn about what happened last Wednesday and what could have happened if any of these militia types who were there armed and who had a lot of the equipment necessary, including nooses. If they'd come across Nancy Pelosi or other liberals, what might have happened is a pretty frightening thought. So I think the view on within the Democratic Party, but also amongst the never Trumpers and moderate Republicans, is the full force of the law must be brought to bear.
Now, Trump no doubt has conceded, although very grudgingly, but his supporters, that 30% of the country that continues to support him, remain disenfranchised, forgotten, they feel victimized, and their anger is still simmering, and it could easily ignite again. Will this therefore be perhaps the greatest first challenge Biden has to confront?
Yes, but for sure, but there's a challenge in between now and then. There are 9 days to go before Trump leaves office. And in that time, he's called for a Million Militia March this coming weekend and on Inauguration Day to protest the stolen election, in his words. Million Militia March, and I've been looking at the literature online, I've been looking at the social media about it. The organizers are asking for armed people to turn up. So that's a pretty worrying prospect. Donald Trump does not believe, he has not conceded this election. He continues to say, in spite of having lost his Twitter account, he continues to say it's the biggest fraud in American history. And tens of millions of Americans, and I would put it at considerably higher than 30%, by the way, continue to believe that to be the case. If you actually believe that is true,
and Trump
then you believe radical action is necessary.
And Trump himself is calling for this Million Militia March, and he himself is asking for people to come armed.
He himself has not asked for people to come armed, but the groups that he, until he lost his Twitter account, was retweeting and clearly in cahoots with, are organizing this. And Trump is very clearly indicating that he supports protests against this election.
In which case, are these not grounds for Vice President Pence to step in and apply the 25th Amendment? CNN has gone on record to say that Pence is thinking about it, but CNN is the only channel to say so. But do you think these could be grounds that might sway the Vice President to take action? Because clearly, a repeat of what happened last Wednesday, and this Million Militia March could be much worse, simply cannot be tolerated.
Yeah, the 25th Amendment provides for the vice president with a majority of the cabinet to remove a president on grounds of incapacity, including mental incapacity. There is no doubt that Trump is, in some respects, mentally ill. This man is deranged. His paranoid delusions grow with proximity to the day he leaves office. And he's desperate. He's lashing out. So there's no doubt that this is exactly what the 25th Amendment was passed for, and that Mike Pence should invoke it. But Mike Pence, I think, probably has an even stronger self-preservation instinct than he does a rectitude towards the spirit of the laws. And he would become hate figure number one. If you remember last week, the point of this rally that Trump spoke at, and that others in his world, Mike Flynn, Rudy Giuliani, all these sort of cranks around him, the point of it was to pressure Mike Pence to, in his role presiding over the Senate as president of the Senate, which is what the vice president is, to help try and turn this election. That was the point. And there were groups of militia marauding inside the Capitol building looking for Mike Pence. Some of them saying that they want to hang him. Lynn Wood, one of the president's lawyers, has said that Mike Pence should be executed. So I think it's probably the case, I'm guessing here, but I think it's an educated guess, that Mike Pence is scared of being the man who removes Trump from office and is therefore not going to do it.
In which case, let me ask you this. If Pence lacks the gumption or the guts to act and remove Trump from office, and this Million Militia March goes ahead, Worse still, if people turn up armed, how worried are you about this weekend? We're talking about something that could happen in 5 days' time.
I'm extremely worried. I mean, this republic is very fragile. There are 400 million guns in this country. America has more than half of the world's privately owned guns, and some of these are semi-automatic military issue weapons. Um, Yet it only has 5% of the world's population. So I am extremely worried. I don't expect 1 million people to turn up in Washington. Don't get me wrong, but you only needed 8,000 last Wednesday for this chaos to ensue. So if you got 20, 30,000, this is going to be an extremely worrying situation. I will say, though, that, given the tardiness and I dare say incompetence of the police, lack of foresight, the Capitol Hill police in particular, but the DC police as well, lack of foresight about what was obviously coming last Wednesday, that all of us knew was coming. I suspect they will overcorrect, and that you're going to see a heavily armed Washington D.C. With uniformed men on the streets everywhere you look from this weekend onwards. At least that is what I hope will be the case.
Let's look beyond the fear, apprehension, and concern about this proposed Million Man March. The problem I suppose Biden faces is that not only is this the greatest challenge that he has to contend with, but his very presence in the White House will, for Trump supporters, keep the wound and injury festering and bleeding. And Trump, even out of office, will presumably do everything he can to scratch that wound. Won't this therefore become a worse problem once Biden is actually ensconced in the White House?
Biden is going to attempt to be the president of healing and of unity. I have to say, although I think these are laudable sentiments, and I think that Biden, as president-elect, has acted with great calm and restraint, that this is a Herculean challenge. This is a Herculean challenge. There is a sort of cognitive, cultural, even spiritual divide in America that is going to take a lot more than a well-intentioned president to overcome. And if he's going to succeed as president, he's going to need Republican support on Capitol Hill. He has 50 votes in the Senate, which Kamala Harris, as vice president, can make a majority on 51, 49 issues. But to get any serious legislation passed, such as restoring American democracy, the integrity of its election system, such as criminal justice reform, including racial justice. Any of these things are going to require some Republican support. And I have to say, given how few Republicans have come out, very, very few elected, plenty of non-elected or ex-elected, but currently elected and those seeking re-election, almost none have come out, barring one or two, Mitt Romney, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. Given how few of those have come out and stood up, I'm very skeptical that Biden is going to be able to demonstrate the bipartisan spirit that he, in some ways, embodies in his career, that he's always been about. It's going to be an incredibly difficult task to achieve.
So are you also suggesting that reports that the Republican Party could be deeply divided over either Trump or Trumpism are somewhat exaggerated? The fact that so few Republicans have spoken out in the way Lisa Murkowski or Mitt Romney have spoken out suggests that their concerns about their own self-preservation or their commitment to Trumpism remain strong.
It does. And I mean, I don't think it's a personal belief in Trumpism. This is opportunism. In the case of somebody like Josh Hawley, the very ambitious young senator from Missouri, who gave a fist, a sort of victory salute to the demonstrators last Wednesday. Tom Cotton of Arkansas, similar kind of populist nationalist figure. It's opportunism in their case. In the case of somebody like Marco Rubio, it's more like cowardice, that the fear of what the mob will do to you and the primary challenge to your seat that will come if you in any way deviate from Trump is too great. So I think what you'll see, rather than a third party develop a split in the Republicans, you'll just see a trickle of Republicans out of the party to the Democratic Party or to becoming independents. There's not going to be a split. The GOP is an ultra nationalist Trumpian party for the foreseeable future, and it tolerates within its tent white supremacists. And we should not forget that. And fantasists who believe that Washington is a deep state run by satanic, pedophilic forces. When you get a party that goes that far into the dark, it doesn't hold a Socratic debate and decide this is the wrong direction. Let's adjust. It's too deep in.
Let me touch on something else that you referred to briefly earlier on. The fact that the police and the law enforcement agencies virtually stood by and let the mob storm the Capitol. The Washington Post even had reports of police officers posing for selfies with the mob, even pushing barricades aside to assist them. Were these just individuals who were irresponsible? Or is there a greater fear that police agencies and law enforcement agencies are split in pro-Trump and anti-Trump divisions?
I think there is a lot of support for Trump in the ranks of police forces around the country. They didn't used to endorse presidents, but in this election, the main organization of national police forces endorsed President Trump. As regards those who were seen, I had a friend in the Capitol. She said she saw police doing selfies with the protesters, by the way. I think that there was a lot of sympathy. A lot of the people storming, it now turns out, storming the Capitol building were off-duty police officers from other parts of the country. You got the same concern within the ranks of the military, particularly at the lower levels. The higher up you go, the more constitutionally aware and responsible and shocked they are by Trump's behavior. And there's been a lot of planning in the Pentagon to try and forestall any situation where Trump invokes the Insurrection Act, which allows him to declare martial law. So they're very apprised and they're very aware. But in the rank and file of many law enforcement and other armed and uniformed agencies across America, Immigration Service being another example, there's huge support for Trump, huge support for him.
If there were a sizable number of off-duty police officers who were actually part of the crowd that stormed the Capitol, has action been taken against them?
There have been a number of arrests. I'm not sure how many of the former police officers are included in those arrests. It would have to be, if they're back in their states, their own colleagues who were arresting them. I don't think you've seen the kind of systematic action that you would like to see after a failed coup attempt. The events of last Wednesday are worth capturing in this sense. If this had been a Black Lives Matter protest in which they attempted to storm the Capitol building, or if this had been an American Muslim protest group that had attempted to storm the Capitol building, there would have been blood flowing down the steps of the Capitol building. There would, no doubt about it. They would have been called terrorists across the board, and there would have been bloodshed on a large scale. The fact of the matter is these people were allowed into the building. They were prevented by some police officers and eventually, belatedly, the National Guard from reaching lawmakers. But if they had got hold, as I said earlier, of Nancy Pelosi or other well-known liberal figures, I don't think that they would have come out alive.
Frightening. And it's not just America that is shattered by what happened last Wednesday. To be honest, the world is shaken. America presents itself as the shining city on a hill, and the rest of us not only accept it, but look up to it. Today, as a result, how damaged is America's international image?
I think it's hugely battered. I mean, you asked about what Biden's going to do. One of Biden's key goals as for his foreign policy as president is to set up a summit of democracies in order to sort of reintroduce values-based diplomacy into America's interactions with the world that were so damaged by the Iraq War. I think he's going to find that very difficult now. I don't think people want to be taking lectures from an American president, even one who's a victim of all of this, or at least an intended victim of all of this, such as Joe Biden, even a decent person, such as Joe Biden. I still don't think the world is going to want to be hearing American lectures about democracy and the rule of law. I think what they want to see, and I think the Biden people recognize this now, they want to see America, they like charity, democracy begins at home. America has got to tackle its own fragilities as a liberal democracy before it starts showcasing and promoting democracy and democratic values in a sort of aggressive way overseas.
Something that you must have noticed is that the Chinese and the Iranians were very quick to mock and gloat. And certainly on social media, there have been a lot of jokes about the Iraqis sending their soldiers to maintain law and order in America. Trump set out to make America great again, but has he instead made it weaker?
He's made America incalculably weaker. But I think, as we've discussed before, and as I've written about in the FT and a book, Trump's a symptom of a problem that's been building for quite a long time. He's a sort of horribly metastasized symptom who's made that problem considerably worse. But the problem didn't begin with Trump. What was it that caused Trump to be elected? What was it that built up to his election? And I think it's a profound cynicism about politics. There is, of course, a white and particularly a white male alienation from a society that's becoming modern and multicultural, and where whites may no longer be a majority a generation from now. There is that. There is, I think, that the extraordinary inequality in the economy and the sort of hollowing out of jobs in the middle. And, you know, middle class is the stable foundation of any democracy, is to have a strong middle class. So when you lose the middle class, when the economy bifurcates, politics polarizes. It's a sort of analog. So I think there are a lot of problems here that I and others have been writing about for 15 or so years. And fixing them is not going to be easy. America's a very tattered and it's a very fragile model right now. Biden's hope is to stabilize things, to stop the bloodletting, and then to try and address some of these underlying causes. But for the reasons we discussed earlier, you need two hands to clap. And I'm not sure the Republicans are prepared to mix metaphors, to dance with him at this party.
In which case, tell me, how do you assess Biden's chances of success? I know that having won the 2 Senate seats in Georgia, now along with Kamala Harris's casting vote, he has a majority in both houses of Congress. But that's said and done. For a lot of legislation, he needs votes of 60%, not 50 or 51. What are the chances that he'll be able to push through the radical plans that he's talked about, as well as other measures that are now needed to tackle the deep alienation you've just referred to?
Very low chances of big radical reform passing Congress. I think that he can do a lot as on the foreign policy stage. That's where a president's really unencumbered. He can do quite a lot through executive action in terms of criminal justice reform. And he can do a lot in terms of tone setting. The man is a fundamentally decent person. He's got high integrity, Joe Biden, and he's appointed a lot of people to his administration who share similar characteristics. So I don't think you can underestimate the tone change that we're going to see, the emphasis on competence. And I do think that the one most important thing, other than the democracy crisis, that Biden can make a huge short-term impact on is the vaccine rollout, is defeating this pandemic. And that, I think, will show a sort of night and day contrast with how Trump has either ignored or misused this pandemic for his own ends. So, if you were to look at the glass half full right now, I'm looking at it as not just half empty, but almost completely empty. But if you were to take a more optimistic sort of forecast of Biden, then you would talk about the pandemic being defeated by early summer, the animal spirits of the economy then unleashing, and some of the poison draining from the politics, which then in turn gives Biden more space to pick off moderate Republicans to push through some of these reforms that are desperately needed to address the economic and social alienation so many Americans feel.
So look down the road. America is a country you know better than most people. You're fond of it. You've lived there for over a decade. What sort of situation do you see 6 months from now, 1 year from now?
Well, I do see the pandemic as being pretty much in the rearview mirror by then. I do see Biden being constructive in trying to get the vaccine to parts of the world that can't afford it. And that way restoring some of America's moral authority. And of course, at the same time, indulging in some kind of a great game with China, which desperately wants to vaccinate Africa before America does. I think that because this is politically manic culture that we're living in, that even 6 months from now, but certainly a year, the 2022 midterm elections will predominate. And Democrats will be desperate to increase their majority so that they can get things done. And Republicans, well, we'll be seeing a test of, is this still Trump's party? I suspect it will be to some degree, but by then there will be new Trumpian people auditing to take over from him. And there might be voices pushing back to say, let's return to being a more traditional conservative party that believes in the Constitution, for example. We'll see. I don't want to forecast too precisely because it is such a radically fluent situation that we're in.
But one worrying thought, to slightly misquote Shakespeare from Julius Caesar, like Caesar's ghost, Trump's ghost will remain mighty yet for quite a while.
It will indeed. One advantage of impeaching him, even after convicting him, even after he's left office, is it would stop him running again in 2024. So it wouldn't just be an academic exercise where the system says, we disapprove of you, you do not deserve to be president, which is a valuable thing in itself. But it would stop him from being able to run again in 2024. But on the other hand, be careful what you wish for. It's like, let's look at who else might run. And once you look at what Josh Hawley stands for and look at his record and what he says, this is a more competent version of white nationalism.
Except that to even convict him, you need 16 Republican senators to change sides, don't you?
Yeah, it's not likely. It's not likely. I'd give it a sort of 1 in 10 probability.
So as the Chinese say, we live in interesting times.
We live in fascinating times. The last time anybody shot up the Capitol Hill, it was my people in 1814. So maybe every couple of centuries this is scheduled to happen.
Ed Luce, thank you very much for talking to me. Take care, stay safe.
A pleasure.